Samantha Collins sat alone in her corner office, her gaze fixed on the city skyline as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The phone call she received earlier still echoed in her mind. A high-profile case, they said, involving a prominent politician accused of bribery and corruption. The name, Thomas Caldwell, was familiar to everyone who followed politics. A charismatic figure, Caldwell had built a career on promises of transparency and justice, only to find himself embroiled in a scandal that could ruin everything. The firm's senior partners had given Samantha the case, trusting her with the delicate task of defending Caldwell. As a criminal defense attorney, Samantha was no stranger to controversial cases, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about the charges, it was about the implications. The case threatened to expose a web of corruption that could reach far beyond Caldwell. She spent the evening poring over the initial evidence. There were documents, phone records, and testimonies from key witnesses. The prosecution's case hinged on a series of bank transfers and secret meetings, suggesting Caldwell had accepted bribes in exchange for political favors. Yet, something felt off. The evidence was too perfect, too neat. Samantha knew the game well enough to suspect a setup, but the question was, by whom? As she delved deeper, she came across a list of names tied to Caldwell's dealings. Some were familiar, lobbyists, business executives, but others were more obscure. Among them, one name stood out, Judge Harold Whitmore. Whitmore was known for his stern demeanor and unyielding stance on corruption. His presence in the documents piqued Samantha's interest. What was his connection to Caldwell, and why hadn't the prosecution highlighted it? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Samantha arranged a meeting with Caldwell. The politician's office was in a state of disarray when she arrived, with aides and staffers scrambling to manage the fallout from the scandal. Caldwell himself appeared calm, a practiced demeanor that did little to reassure Samantha. As they sat in his office, she laid out her concerns about the evidence. "Thomas," she began, "I need to know everything. No matter how small or seemingly insignificant, it could be crucial." Caldwell sighed, rubbing his temples. "I swear, Samantha, I have no idea how my name got involved in this mess. Those meetings, they were about campaign funding, but nothing illegal." Samantha wasn't convinced. "And Judge Whitmore? Why is his name appearing in your records?" Caldwell looked genuinely surprised. "Whitmore? I don't recall him being involved in any of this." "Are you sure?" Samantha nodded. "His name is there, and I need to know why. If we're going to build a defense, we need to understand the full picture." As they continued to talk, a troubling thought formed in Samantha's mind. What if this case was bigger than just Caldwell? What if it was part of a larger scheme to manipulate the political landscape, using Caldwell as a pawn? Leaving Caldwell's office, Samantha felt a chill of apprehension. She needed to investigate further, to find the connections that weren't immediately obvious. The next step was clear: she had to confront Judge Whitmore. But as she walked back to her car, she noticed a figure watching her from across the street. A sense of unease settled in her stomach. Ignoring the feeling, she got into her car and drove off, her mind racing with questions. Who was watching her? And more importantly, how deep did the corruption go? As she merged onto the highway, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was an anonymous tip: "Be careful who you trust. The truth is more dangerous than you think." Samantha's heart pounded as she read the words. This was no ordinary case. It was a game of shadows, and she was right in the middle of it. Samantha arrived home late, her thoughts still tangled in the complexities of the case. She had spent the day piecing together the connections between Caldwell and Judge Whitmore. The anonymous message she received only heightened her suspicions that there was much more at stake than just Caldwell's political career. But who was the sender, and why were they helping her? The next morning, Samantha decided to pay Judge Whitmore a visit. His reputation as an unflinching arbiter of justice made him a daunting figure, but she needed answers. Whitmore's chambers were in a grand courthouse, an imposing building that seemed to embody the weight of the law itself. Samantha had secured a brief meeting under the guise of discussing another case. As she entered the judge's office, she noticed the walls lined with plaques and accolades, a testament to his long and illustrious career. "Ms. Collins," Whitmore greeted her with a cordial smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Samantha took a seat, feeling the weight of the room's scrutiny. "Thank you for seeing me, Your Honor. I actually wanted to discuss a matter related to Thomas Caldwell's case." Whitmore's expression shifted slightly, a subtle tension creeping into his demeanor. "Ah, the Caldwell case. Quite a mess, that one." "Indeed," Samantha agreed. "I came across some records that mention your name in connection with Caldwell's campaign activities. I was hoping you could clarify your involvement." Whitmore's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained even. "I assure you, Ms. Collins, any involvement I had was strictly professional. If my name appears, it must be a mistake. Samantha wasn't satisfied. There was something in Whitmore's response that felt rehearsed, too polished. I'm sure you're aware of the seriousness of the charges against Caldwell. Any information, no matter how minor it might seem, could be critical. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, studying her. Ms. Collins, I have always maintained a strict separation between my duties as a judge and any personal or political interests. If there is any confusion, it will be resolved in due course. Samantha nodded, sensing the futility of pressing further at this point. She thanked him for his time and left, her mind racing. Whitmore's guarded responses only deepened her suspicion that he was hiding something. As she exited the courthouse, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message, he's not the only one. Look closer. Frustrated by the cryptic nature of the messages, Samantha resolved to dig deeper. She knew she needed help, someone with the skills to navigate the murky waters of political intrigue and corruption. She reached out to an old friend, Mark Donovan, a former investigative journalist turned private investigator. Mark had a knack for uncovering the truths others wanted buried. Later that evening, they met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Mark, with his rugged appearance and sharp eyes, listened intently as Samantha laid out the details of the case. This isn't just about Caldwell, Mark. There's something bigger going on. Judge Whitmore's name came up, and he was too quick to dismiss it. I need to know who else is involved. Mark nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like a classic case of political maneuvering. If Whitmore's in on it, others will be too. Have you considered the possibility that Caldwell might be a scapegoat? Samantha sighed. It's crossed my mind. But without solid evidence, it's all conjecture. And then there's these messages I've been getting, warning me to be careful. Mark raised an eyebrow. Anonymous tips? Sounds like someone's trying to guide you, but you can't trust that kind of help without verification. Samantha agreed, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing on her. I need you to dig into Whitmore's connections, see if there's anything we can use. And find out who might be sending these messages. Mark leaned back, a glint of excitement in his eyes. Consider it done. But be careful, Sam. If there's a conspiracy, you don't know how far it reaches. As they parted ways, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The streets were quiet, but every shadow seemed to hide a threat. She drove home, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. If Mark could find something concrete, they might be able to turn the case around. But if they were dealing with a larger conspiracy, Samantha knew she was venturing into dangerous territory. Back at her apartment, she found another message waiting for her. They're watching you. Trust no one. Samantha's hand trembled as she read the words. The case had become more than just a professional challenge, it was now a personal battle for truth and survival. Over the next few days, Mark dug deep into Judge Whitmore's background and connections. Samantha continued to prepare for the upcoming preliminary hearings, juggling court appearances and meetings with Caldwell. The pressure mounted as the media frenzy surrounding the case intensified. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, hungry for any morsel of information about the scandal. Samantha met with Caldwell in a private conference room at the law firm. His usually composed demeanor was fraying at the edges, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. We need a plan, Samantha, Caldwell said, desperation seeping into his voice. The media is crucifying me, and the prosecution is throwing everything they've got at us. Samantha took a deep breath, trying to project calm. We're going to challenge the credibility of their evidence, focus on inconsistencies. But we need more. I have someone looking into other potential players, and there's a chance we can find leverage. Caldwell nodded, though his expression remained troubled. And Whitmore? You think he's involved? His name keeps coming up, and he's being evasive. I don't trust it, Samantha replied. But it's not just him. We need to consider that there could be a network of people working together. As they wrapped up their meeting, Mark called with news. I've got something, he said, his tone urgent. Whitmore has a long-standing association with a lobbying firm called Capital Strategies. They've been funneling money through various shell companies to political campaigns, including Caldwell's. But it gets worse, some of these companies are linked to offshore accounts. Samantha's pulse quickened. And Caldwell? Caldwell's records show transactions with these entities, but they also show payments to others, including high-ranking officials and judges. It looks like a classic case of money laundering and bribery, Mark explained. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about Caldwell, it was a web of corruption that entangled the judicial and political systems. We need to bring this to the authorities, Samantha said, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions swirling inside her. Mark hesitated. Are you sure? If this goes public, it could blow up in unexpected ways. And whoever's behind this might not sit idly by. Samantha knew the risks but felt a growing sense of duty. We have to. It's the right thing to do. Later that evening, as Samantha reviewed the new information, her phone buzzed again with another anonymous message: "You've found the thread. Pull it, but be ready for the consequences." The message sent a shiver down her spine. She was close to uncovering the truth, but the warning was clear: this was dangerous territory. That night, she barely slept, her mind racing with the potential fallout. Who was sending these messages, and why were they so cryptic? The next day, Samantha decided to confront Caldwell about the new findings. They met in his office, the atmosphere tense. She laid out the connections Mark had uncovered, watching Caldwell's reaction closely. He looked pale, his hands trembling slightly. "This is incredible. I never knew the extent of it. I thought it was just campaign funding, nothing more." Samantha pressed him. "But the evidence shows you were involved. Payments to judges, including Whitmore, offshore accounts, it's all there." Caldwell slumped in his chair. "They must have used me. I swear, I didn't know. They approached me with donations, said it was standard practice." Samantha felt a mix of pity and frustration. "You need to understand, Thomas, this isn't just about your career. This could bring down a lot of powerful people." Caldwell's eyes met hers, filled with a pleading desperation. "What do we do?" "We expose it," Samantha said firmly. "I'll take this to the DA. But you need to be honest about everything. If there's any chance of leniency, it lies in cooperation." As she left Caldwell's office, her resolve hardened. She knew this could be a career-defining moment, but it could also be perilous. The forces they were challenging were powerful, and the stakes were high. She arranged a meeting with the district attorney, intending to present the evidence. On her way to the DA's office, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every car in her rearview mirror seemed suspicious, every pedestrian a potential threat. The city felt hostile, its familiar streets now filled with shadows. When she finally reached the DA's office, Samantha met with DA Rachel Moore, a tough and seasoned prosecutor known for her no-nonsense approach. As Samantha presented the evidence, Moore's expression shifted from curiosity to grave concern. "This is explosive, Samantha," Moore said, leaning back in her chair. "If what you're saying is true, it could implicate numerous officials and disrupt the entire judicial system." Samantha nodded. "That's why I came to you. We need to act carefully, but we can't let this corruption continue." Moore agreed, promising to take immediate action. As Samantha left the office, her phone buzzed once more. "You've done well. Now watch your back." The message was both a compliment and a warning. Samantha realized she was now in the crosshairs of those who would do anything to protect their secrets. As she drove home, she kept a close watch on her surroundings, acutely aware that the battle was just beginning. The case had turned into a dangerous game, and Samantha was right at the center of it. In the days following Samantha's meeting with the DA, the atmosphere in the city grew tense. News of the potential scandal had leaked, causing a media storm. Speculation ran wild about who might be involved and how deep the corruption went. For Samantha, the pressure was immense, but there was also a growing sense of urgency. If they were to bring down the corrupt network, they needed to act swiftly and decisively. One evening, as Samantha reviewed her notes in her apartment, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone and felt a twinge of apprehension. Peering through the peephole, she saw Mark standing there, looking agitated. She quickly let him in. "We have a problem," Mark said, his voice low and urgent. "I dug deeper into capital strategies and found something disturbing. There's a file on you." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. "On me? What do you mean?" Mark handed her a folder. Inside were surveillance photos of her, detailed reports on her movements, and even personal information about her family and friends. "It seems they're trying to intimidate you or worse," Mark said grimly. "This isn't just about covering their tracks, they're targeting you specifically." Samantha felt a chill. The anonymous messages, the feeling of being watched, it all made sense now. Someone had been keeping close tabs on her, and they knew too much. "We need to go public with this," she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "The more exposure, the safer we'll be." Mark nodded. "Agreed. But you need to be careful. They're watching every move." Determined not to be cowed, Samantha reached out to several trusted media contacts. The next day, she arranged a press conference, intending to reveal the extent of the corruption and the threats she had been receiving. The conference was held at the law firm's office, with media from all over the city crowding the room. As Samantha stood at the podium, she felt a surge of adrenaline. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and resolute. "Today, I am here to disclose evidence of a widespread corruption network that has infiltrated our political and judicial systems." She detailed the connections between Caldwell, Judge Whitmore, Capital Strategies, and others. She also revealed the threats made against her, showing the surveillance files as proof. The room buzzed with shock and disbelief, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling notes furiously. "This is not just about one man or one case," Samantha continued. "This is about justice and the integrity of our institutions. I urge everyone involved to come forward and cooperate with the authorities." The press conference sent shockwaves through the city. The DA's office immediately announced an investigation, and calls for an independent inquiry echoed across the media. But as the public reaction grew, so did the danger. Samantha knew that exposing such a powerful network would not go unchallenged. That evening, as she left the office, Samantha felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She decided to stay at a hotel for the night, hoping to maintain some distance from potential threats. Mark had arranged for additional security, but Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. As she settled into her hotel room, her phone buzzed with another message: "You shouldn't have done that. Now it's too late." The message was like a punch to the gut. Samantha knew she had crossed a line and that the people behind the corruption wouldn't back down easily. She immediately called Mark, sharing the latest threat. "We need to find out who sent this and fast," Mark said. "I'll track it down. In the meantime, stay put and keep a low profile." But Samantha's instincts told her that she couldn't just sit and wait. She had one last card to play. Pulling out her laptop, she accessed the law firm's secure server. There, she found a folder marked Project Hawkeye, a file she had come across earlier but hadn't yet explored. As she opened the folder, Samantha's eyes widened. Inside were documents detailing a covert surveillance operation on several judges, politicians, and business leaders. It was a list of those compromised or controlled by the corruption network. Among the names was Judge Whitmore, but there were others, including high-ranking officials she hadn't considered. This was the smoking gun. Samantha quickly copied the files to an encrypted drive, knowing that this information was too dangerous to keep to herself. Just as she finished, her phone rang. It was Mark. "Sam, I've traced the messages," he said breathlessly. "They're coming from inside Capital Strategies. They know you're digging into them." Before Samantha could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. Her heart raced as she cautiously approached, looking through the peephole. Two men stood outside, their expressions cold and determined. "Samantha Collins, open the door. We just want to talk," one of them said, his voice smooth but menacing. Samantha backed away, her mind racing. She knew she was trapped, but she couldn't let them have the files. Quickly, she grabbed her phone and texted Mark, "Capital Strategies men here. Can't talk. Sending files now." As the files uploaded, the door burst open. The men entered, eyes locked on her. "Hand over the drive, Ms. Collins," one of them demanded, advancing towards her. Samantha stood her ground, clutching the drive in her hand. "You won't get away with this," she said, defiance in her voice despite the fear coursing through her veins. The men exchanged a look, then lunged at her. Samantha tried to run, but they grabbed her, wresting the drive from her grasp. In the struggle, she managed to hit the send button on her phone, sending the files to Mark just as they subdued her. "That was a mistake," one of the men snarled, pocketing the drive. "Now you're in real trouble." As they dragged her out of the room, Samantha felt a grim satisfaction. She had played her part, exposed the corruption, and sent the evidence to someone she trusted. Now, she had to hope that Mark would get it to the right people and that justice would prevail. In the back of the van they threw her into, Samantha braced herself for what was to come. She had no illusions about her situation. She was in the hands of desperate, dangerous people. But she also knew that the truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. The corruption had been exposed, but at what cost? Samantha could only hope that her sacrifice would lead to a reckoning for those who had twisted the system to their advantage. As the van sped away into the night, she steeled herself for the fight ahead, knowing that the battle was far from over. The van sped through the city, its tires humming against the pavement as it left the city limits and headed into the more secluded areas. Samantha's mind raced alongside the vehicle, contemplating her next move. The men had taken her phone and the encrypted drive, but she knew Mark had received the files. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before the authorities acted. As the van turned onto a remote road, the driver spoke into a two-way radio, confirming their destination. Samantha tried to remain calm, assessing her surroundings and the men who had taken her. Both were muscular, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, their faces impassive but watchful. It was clear they were professionals, likely hired to clean up the mess the corruption scandal had caused. After what felt like an eternity, the van pulled up to a secluded warehouse. The men roughly pulled Samantha out, her arms bound behind her back, and escorted her inside. The building was dimly lit, filled with crates and industrial equipment, the perfect place for a discreet operation. Inside, they were met by a third man, older and more authoritative. He had a calculating look in his eyes, the kind Samantha had seen in countless courtroom adversaries. "Ms. Collins, so nice of you to join us," he said, a thin smile stretching across his lips. "I'm afraid you've been meddling in affairs far beyond your understanding." Samantha squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. "You're not going to get away with this. The truth is out now, and it's only a matter of time before you're all exposed." The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a cold, analytical gaze. "You see, that's where you're wrong. We've been very careful, Ms. Collins. You've uncovered some details, but nothing that can't be contained." He gestured to the men, who forced Samantha into a chair. "Now, let's discuss what you've shared and who you've shared it with," he continued, pulling up a chair to face her. "Tell me, who else knows about the files you sent?" Samantha remained silent, her mind racing. She knew they would go after Mark next, but revealing his involvement could put him in even greater danger. She had to buy time, to find a way out of the situation. The man leaned closer, his expression turning menacing. "You might think you're protecting someone, but let me assure you, no one is beyond our reach. Cooperate, and this can go smoothly. Resist, and things will become unpleasant." Before Samantha could respond, a loud crash echoed from the back of the warehouse. The men guarding her turned, reaching for their weapons, but it was too late. A team of armed law enforcement officers stormed the building, shouting commands and quickly subduing the captors. Amid the chaos, Mark appeared, rushing to Samantha's side. "Are you okay?" he asked, cutting the ropes that bound her wrists. Samantha nodded, relief washing over her. "How did you find me?" Mark grinned, helping her to her feet. "Once I got the files, I knew they'd come for you. I had a tracker on your phone, just in case." The DA's office was already on high alert after the press conference, so it wasn't hard to mobilize a response. As they were escorted out of the warehouse, Samantha saw the older man being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury. The police had captured the entire operation, thanks to the evidence Samantha had uncovered and Mark's quick thinking. Outside, the dawn was breaking, casting a soft light over the scene. Samantha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few days begin to lift. The immediate danger was over, but the real work was just beginning. The files contained enough information to bring down several high-profile figures, and the ensuing legal battles would be fierce. The media was already gathering, hungry for the latest developments. As Samantha and Mark were ushered into a police vehicle, she knew they would soon be at the center of a national storm. But for the first time in days, she felt a sense of hope. Later, at the police station, Samantha met with DA Rachel Moore. The files had revealed a vast conspiracy involving not only Thomas Caldwell and Judge Whitmore but also several other politicians and business leaders. The DA's office, with the help of federal authorities, was moving swiftly to secure warrants and prevent any potential escape or destruction of evidence. "You did great work, Samantha," Moore said, her tone serious but warm. "This is going to be one of the biggest cases in recent history. Are you ready for what's coming?" Samantha nodded, though she felt the weight of the responsibility pressing on her. "We have to see this through. The people involved need to be held accountable, and the public needs to know the truth." As the day unfolded, arrests were made across the city, and news outlets began broadcasting the story. The corruption network's unraveling sent shockwaves through the political and legal communities. Thomas Caldwell, realizing the extent of the evidence against him, decided to cooperate with the authorities, providing further insights into the network's operations. For Samantha, the ordeal was far from over. She knew the legal proceedings would be lengthy and complex, with powerful figures fighting to protect themselves. But with the evidence secured and public support growing, she felt confident they could bring about real change. In the following weeks, as the case moved forward, Samantha received countless messages of support and gratitude from those who had been affected by the corruption. She was hailed as a hero by many, though she remained humble, knowing that the real heroes were the everyday people who demanded justice and accountability. Mark continued to work closely with Samantha and the DA's office, ensuring that every piece of evidence was thoroughly investigated. The trials would be long and arduous, but the foundation had been laid for a thorough reckoning. As the initial frenzy died down, Samantha took a moment to reflect on the journey. She had faced fear and danger, but she had also found a renewed sense of purpose. The battle against corruption was ongoing, but she was ready to face it head-on. The final court date loomed, and as Samantha prepared her final arguments, she felt a quiet determination. The truth had prevailed, but the fight for justice was never truly over. There would always be those who sought to exploit the system, but as long as there were people willing to stand up and speak out, there was hope. As she stood before the court, delivering her closing statement, Samantha felt a sense of closure. The journey had been harrowing, but it had also been transformative. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to continue the fight for justice and integrity in a world where both were too often in short supply. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and tears. Justice had been served, but the real victory was in the message sent: corruption, no matter how deep-seated, could and would be rooted out. And so, Samantha Collins emerged not just as a lawyer, but as a beacon of hope in a world desperate for heroes.